We asked and you answered. In our 2024 campaign topics and issues survey, the top concern was the cost of living, ranking above everything else, including crime, election integrity, economic development, and our schools.
And our Kelsey Soto has talked with a UK professor to fact-check the discussions about the economy and inflation, key issues as voters prepare to head to the polls. She's joining us now.
Well, almost 2,500 of you weighed in on our online poll, and even nationally, 8 of 10 registered voters say the economy is so very important when they cast their ballot. So we wanted to ask experts about how we got here and how this shapes decisions in 2024. Americans have felt the tightening of their wallet and squeezing of their budgets in the last few years. Dr. Michael Clark studies this for a living. He's the director of the Center for Business and Economic Research at the University of Kentucky.
Really, inflation has been top of mind for a lot of consumers for some time.
A global pandemic that started during Donald Trump's administration and ended in Joe Biden's was new territory for both parties.
There was a lot of economic stimulus. Households had a lot of money in their pocket, partially because of stimulus, partially because they weren't spending it on other types of things like services.
And then the price of goods surged.
Inflation in 2022, I believe, it got up to around 9%. What that means is that prices had increased by 9% compared to the same point in time the year before.
He tells me ideally the federal government would like to see that number close to 2%, which is why the Federal Reserve recently cut interest rates. Yet some workers were able to capitalize on the tight labor market.
We were seeing very good wage increases that were well above the rates of inflation for leisure and hospitality, retail sector. Those sectors over the past couple of years have been getting some of the largest wage increases.
Dr. Clark admits things have slowed down, but the pandemic really did bring about a lot of lessons.
There was a lot of let's try some policies that can potentially have some benefits. There may be some consequences associated with those, but I do think that having some type of a strong policy response during that time period was probably something that overall helped.
And as far as suspiciously low prices for things like gas near an election cycle, Dr. Clark says it's not that simple.
How much of that really has to do with the actual administration? A lot of the prices that we look at are really determined by market forces that have maybe little to do with the policy issues that we're looking at.
Now, I also asked about consumer spending habits for those big ticket items around a very close and uncertain election. Dr. Clark says it's really hard to put off a big purchase like a home based off administration and who may be running the country. So while some might be watching it closely, it ultimately may not alter their buying decisions. Plenty more discussions to come ahead of election 2024.